Now, that's kind of just the introduction. I said an introduction to the time paradigm. If we really get into the time paradigm, I had to do what I just did to set the stage. And the time paradigm starts this way. Again, which circle are you in? People have trouble answering that question, and we all kind of know it. We've talked about it on these phone calls. And most of what's taught in business school is squarely over in the financial side, and the customer comes along kind of as a afterthought, really. It's always the first chapter in the book, but it's just the plot of all the meats in the red circle. So the question is, how do you resolve what I'm going to call the cost paradigm? Because that's really what goes on in the red circle. We focus on cost. And over in this other circle, you don't focus on cost. It's a way more subjective point of view, and you're focusing on what I'm calling quality consciousness. That's Deming's word. For instance, here, this is just a setup. But if the aim is the customer circle and the business is Coca-Cola, it could be healthcare, it could be anything. If that's the aim, then you're going to come up with words like these that don't really matter, but these are the words. They're not just the only words, but they're things like the customer wants on-time delivery and they don't want to be out of stock, not a lot of yada, yada, yada. You can do that for every industry and any business, any customer. And then the rhetoric or the mantra goes, if you do all that, then just magically financial success will happen. And you go, right, and they go, I'm not buying this, and people start going for the water cooler and leaving the room because it just doesn't seem to be right. So you go back and you say, okay, how about a more objective point of view? Let's maximize the math. Everybody likes that. Now we're just like that book I was talking about. The first chapter was fluff. Now we get into the meat of it, and we do things like this. This happens to be a throughput look at costs, but you get sales, which are made up of price times volume. You subtract all these costs and things, you get what they call cash operating profit. It turns out to be exactly the same thing as EBITDA, and everybody says, yeah, now we're talking. Divide that by all your assets, and you've got return on net assets. Yeah, I got it. That's what we're after. That's the goal. And everybody gets right back in the company circle. And that could stop right there, and that's what happens to all the Deming books. But let's start with the math and back up a step. Really, it starts with these two words, drop size and frequency. And the question becomes, how would you load this Coke truck? How would you provide customer service? It doesn't have to be Coca-Cola. It could be anything. This happened to be what I do. But how do you provide service? Do you try to get a whole lot and do it as efficiently as you can with a great big truck? Or do you go every day with a little bitty truck? Which do you do? What happens to volume if frequency changes? This is intentionally a simple-minded piece of math, but so often, and I really should slow down here just for the effect, but usually, and I'm trying to give away my magic trick, but usually when you ask somebody this question, their mind will go in one or two or three different directions. Well, one of them says it doesn't matter. If you increase the frequency, you will, the drop size will go down, but the volume doesn't change, or vice versa. You increase the drop size and the frequency goes down and the volume doesn't change. Part of that's a paradigm because we're thinking about the left side of the equation, drop size times frequency must balance with the volume. We're not thinking in terms of maybe if the frequency went up, there would be less waste and more capability to deliver, and maybe the volume would go up. In other words, maybe when you look at that equation and you're in the cost circle, company circle, you're thinking about cost. And you're not thinking about eliminating waste. You're not thinking about increasing capability. You're saying, if I go more often, it's going to cost more. Even if I do go more often and it doesn't cost more, it won't make any difference to the volume. So people get tripped up. They go around and round in circles. And then some people, the ones that really are, the head of the class, they say, well, really you should adjust the frequency to match the needs so that if it's a 4th of July weekend, you go more often. And if it's, a snowstorm, you don't go at all. and you just vary the frequency to fit the volume. Now, if you're over in the customer circle and you heard that meeting, you'd say, good God, you mean just because it has a little shower outdoors, you're not going to make a delivery today? Or just because it snowed, we're going to cancel my doctor's appointment? I mean, what's going on here? If I'm in the customer circle, I'm not liking that conversation. But when we're in the company circle, we can go on day after day, meeting after meeting, justifying why we have big drop sizes, varying frequencies, and that's the way it goes. I'm spending a lot of time on that slide, obviously, but what I'm trying to do is make people realize that we really do have a bias to the company circle. And if you look at this thing a little closer, you realize that here's a guy at the blackboard saying volume. If my drop size was 210 cases or patients or whatever it is, and I do it once a week, I'm going to average 210, but the key word is average. And it really wouldn't be 210 every week. It's going to be a 210 plus or minus, so 10%, let's say. And you're going to end up with one of these bell curves. And then he says to himself, well, but shoot, if I went 5 days a week, that would be 42. And that's still 210, but 10% of 42 is only 4. A lot less variation all of a sudden. I'm going to get the same volume. Well, I may get more volume because I'm not going to be guessing wrong once a week and have too much or too little. I'll come every day. It starts to make a little sense, but I still have this achy feeling about cost. If I went 6 days a week, well, it just gets better. And I'm starting to see relationships. And I could even draw a graph. I could say, gosh, if I have large drop sizes and low frequency, my graph might look like that. And if I charted it, the bell curve would look kind of like that. But heck, if I went more often, went every day, 7 days a week, all of a sudden that frequency goes up, the bell curve tightens up, and the drop size gets smaller. And I can kind of almost feel never missing a delivery, always having exactly what the customer wants. And everybody likes it except the cost accountant. He thinks it costs too much. But frequency seems to be more and more important when I think this way. And if you were a statistician, you could even get your math book out and you could draw a bell curve and calculate things like Six Sigma. And you realize that what I'm describing as common cause variation, it's common to the process. It has nothing to do with anything other than the normal stuff embedded in the process that makes it vary a little bit every day. But if I go more often, the variation gets smaller. And I've just improved the process a little bit. I've improved the flow. I've eliminated waste. I've done all the things I've been talking about. But then, heck, I'm in the Coke business. What if we change the price? What if we have a promotion? What if I introduce a new product? What if I run a new advertising campaign? What's that going to do? Well, it's going to spread the bell curve out, isn't it? Everyday low prices kept it tight, but every time I do those things, I jack with it. And what I did is I just introduced special cause variation into that process. You could argue that was good or that was bad, but it was different than common cause. So the game becomes, how do I manage a process to have less and less common cause variation, and how do I deal with that special cause when it comes along? And what is Six Sigma anyway? Well, most everybody on this call kind of knows, and the people that don't know would go, oh my God, I don't even think I want to know when I see that formula. It's the one that tells you that you can be 99.6% sure that the variation is going to fall within these parameters based on the data, not based on management or the customer. That's just a definition I think everybody in this phone call understands. It's also why those Japanese calculators always had a square root key, because they calculated it. We did because we were in the red circle. The Japanese were in the green circle, thanks to Demi. So here's another picture of it. Here's the truck with the red circle thinking you're trying to do a lot of big drops, quantity discounts, pricing, promotions, and bulk deliveries. That's a traditional assumption. That's the way we do it. But now I'm asking you to question those assumptions. Frequency could be the constant. Drop size could be the variable. Traditionally in business, we have things like minimum order quantities, minimum drop size, minimum less than truckload discounts, all kinds of things, or less than truckload, I should say, penalties. But we could go the other way around. We could say, no, we're going to have minimum service levels. I'm coming every day no matter what, rain, sleet, sun or shine or snow, whatever. I'm going to always be there. I'm going to be just in time. And I won't have minimum orders. Our motto is going to become, you call, we haul, no job too small, some too big. When they're too big, we'll call it a special cause, and we'll deal with them separately. But we want to have an organization that can always answer the phone the first ring, always answer the question without having to transfer the call, always make the delivery, always fix the product, what's wrong, and do it right away, just in time. So that's the aim. And we're moving away from the cost paradigm towards what I'm calling the time paradigm. So there's a picture of the two. If you turn them up on their end, you see that the common cause variation is a measure of this truck's capability. And that Y is a Japanese goalpost saying that the more you get in the middle of it, the better it is. The customer's traditional expectations might be the American goalposts, but this particular process doesn't do too well. When you go more often, you drop more loads right in the middle of the cup, and that's where we're starting to focus on quality consciousness. If you have a tighter and tighter process, no matter what the customer wants, his subjective ideas, you can always get inside his parameters. When you're outside, that's the special cause. We still have to deal with that separately. That's what we call 911. Now here's just a little quick review. Variation measures capability. Here's two charts, the high frequency and the low frequency. You got more capability when you have less variation, less capability, you have more variation. But here's the ringer. People tend to think of this average as something to do with capability. It's really just the average capacity. The peak capacity is up there, the down at the other end is your minimum capacity, but you shouldn't confuse capacities with process capabilities. Just because the one on the right has more, you could argue, more, well, the way this graph is drawn, the average capacity is higher on the left, but the point is the capacities and the capabilities are very different things. One has to do with variation, the other has to do with how much it can do on average. But just because I should redraw this thing and have the one on the left a little lower, because just because it has more capability doesn't mean it necessarily has more capacity, or it could have less. We'll get into that more. I think these two words are very important, and we interchange them too often. And people tend to think that they increase capacity, they're a good thing, when in fact they may be doing a bad thing. Okay, now another part of the time paradigm is open all the time, meaning the 7 days. Why isn't 5 days good enough? Where do you quit? Why do you? I think I made the point that once a week is not so good, twice a week is better, but 5 days a week is what most people do. Isn't that good enough? And the question becomes, what happens when the process stops? And this is what happens. You've got a big Friday and a big Monday to cover the weekend, and you've got a pattern or a rhythm that is just like an irregular heartbeat that never quite settles out. You go along, you load in, and then you have to correct on Monday, and it just doesn't run smoothly because of this stops and starts. So all the time is important. the capability to operate all the time is just as what reduces variation as well.